So it seems that your team there is very democratic.
Oh, absolutely. We said, well, maybe if you can't fix it from the outside, maybe you should fix it from the inside. We're using what we have, our capacity to learn, our capacity to innovate, our actual brain power that we have to come up with technological solutions.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Indranil Chaudhury. Welcome you once again at the Hard Talk. We have today a great friend of ours, MLA Shane Getson. He is a government caucus MLA, and over the last 3 days or so, we have had the opportunity to listen to one government caucus and a couple of opposition caucus. Today we have once again the government caucus. He is not from Edmonton, so we really appreciate his time, that he's taking out time from his busy schedule. The budget session is on, I believe,
Yes, sir.
and he's right here. So welcome to our show at Star Canada TV. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, and thank you very much for having me down to do this. And I have to admit, I don't do very many television interviews, so this is something unique for me as well.
Well, this will be more of a conversation rather than an interview, and you are among your friends. So we'll start with knowing a little bit more about you, your background, your family, how you are into the politics, because
Sure.
I believe you're new to this field.
Oh, fantastic.
So let us know a little bit about you.
Yeah, so my name's Shane Getson, the MLA for Lac-Saint Anne-Parkland, and I like to say that Lac-Saint Anne-Parkland is on the border of everything. So literally it's on the Edmonton city limits to the west. We skirt around St. Albert, Morinville. Highway 2 is kind of the boundary to the east, and then we stay just south of West Loch Barrhead. We go all the way out to Highway 22, encapsulate Green Court, White Court, and then we get south and pick up Evansburg, Entwistle, and then we come back to the east and encapsulate, I want to say Seba Beach, and then on that side you're in Lake Wabamun that most people are be familiar with, and then also the Atchison Industrial Park. So it's rolling topography. You have everything from cattle farming, ranching, to grain production, to energy side of things, to manufacturing and fabrication, and obviously right on the city limits. So everything from acreages to farms and everything and anything in between.
Excellent. So there's a lot of potential to grow there, a lot of investment potential as well.
Well, there is, and one of the things we look at regionally, I mean, we're sitting on the outskirts of everything. We have 2 airports, for example, the Edmonton Villeneuve Airport up at Marithorpe. So we've got a Villeneuve landing group we're looking at doing there. We encapsulate or participate with several counties in that area. So we have Lac-Saint Anne-Parkland, we have Sturgeon, part of that, and then on Parkland are the larger ones, as well as Yellowhead County, West Loch County, part of Arthur County as well.
So it has been reconstituted as well. I believe the boundaries have been redrawn in the recent past.
Yeah, that's correct. I believe the old boundaries for it were White Court, Lac-Saint Anne, and essentially right now it's been redrawn. So that was the last election, and where we chose to put our office up was right in Ottawa. It's almost right in the center of it. But some of the highlights we have, I mean, Lake Wabamun, Lake Nakaman, we have Lac-Saint Anne, obviously. We have the Pembina River through there. There's some beautiful landscapes. If anyone ever has been out on Highway 16 going out to the Pembina Valley, I mean, it's something very unique in the area with a nice river gorge and
Great camping sites as well.
fantastic camping sites. And it's interesting that, my prior line of work in the midstream sector, I had project teams that were from Edmonton, but all over the world. And Edmonton and our industry is such a great fabric when it comes to that. And the Filipino community, a couple of my friends, a shout out to Max and Jojo out there, and they were actually telling me about this great camping spot, and if I've ever been there. Well, I actually grew up in that area, and it was out in the Pembina area.
I see. So you talked about your work fit. So what has been your work area prior to joining politics? What bring you now to politics and your family?
Well, I'm a civil engineering technologist, so I grew up on a farm, and then went to NAIT, took civil engineering, and I was going to decide whether I wanted to go to the U of A or not.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, I was tired of being the starving student. I thought I would go to work, and an industrial contractor from Edmonton actually picked me up as Leadcore Construction.
Mm-hmm.
So Leadcore Industrial, ended up on a diamond mine project, learned project controls, ended up going through several divisions with them, and then ended up starting my own consulting company in 2003, and then really ventured in and worked for clients who was in Canada, Synovus, ended up on the pipeline side of the fence with Enbridge predominantly for the most of my career. And there I became senior manager planning execution with them, and had project teams that were both stationed in Canada and the US. So we did everything from transshipment facilities where we were moving oil from mine up North Dakota down to along the Delaware River in Pennsylvania. to the Alberta Clipper project. We had active right away all the way from Norman Wells to Chicago that I took part of or was managing for the transition group. High voltage power lines, so the Montana timeline from Great Falls to Lethbridge, as well as 350 windmills. So my team, we troubleshot. It was project recovery and project controls. I sat on their controls council and their procurement councils as well. So literally had active managing projects both Canada and the US. And turned out I was only being home for about 6 days a month, the height of my career. And I have a wife and 4 children. And my wife said, you better figure out what's more important, family or work. So at that point I came back, and coincidentally that's when our economy started coming down. Mm-hmm. So when I came off from working those hours and within the midline or midstream industry, I should say, was pretty much frustrated. Like our industries were under attack. And I have a friend that was vice president down for a water company down in Calgary. They were looking at putting in a pipeline. Essentially, it was called the White Fox Project, that would take processed water from Whitecourt and move it up towards Fox Creek. And my friend called me up and says, I'm really good at water. You built the pipelines, not me. Would you be interested in doing this and bringing your team? So absolutely. So it's rather frustrating when you have a project, you have it fully sanctioned, fully funded, you have industry partners. It's displacing freshwater usage for fracking. The counties, the areas need it. It's environmentally sound. Everybody wants this. Everybody. Mm-hmm. You're turning effluent that would be released typically into a freshwater stream. It's cleaned up from that point, but you're turning something that costs industry dollars and cents, turning it into a commodity and offsetting freshwater usage. And unfortunately, we couldn't get it through the regulatory process because they couldn't decide whether it was an energy project or utility project. So they decided to do both. And it canceled the project, pushed the project back for another year. We have $155 million we can't spend. I have 30 of my own people who have been on the job, and we can't build it, and we can't do the right things. So that coincided with the nomination race, actually, for the UCP. And someone not so dissimilar to yourself asked me what I was doing. I was frustrated, and they said, well, maybe if you can't fix it from the outside, maybe you should fix it from the inside. And that's how it started. So the NDP gentleman I ran against, he was the former agriculture minister. Yeah, he was the incumbent. He was the agriculture and forestry minister. So I honestly had nothing to lose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, did what I could, and here I am now.
Wow, fantastic. So you're now in the decision-making table.
Well,
yeah, in a government caucus member.
Well, it's an interesting thing. So if you're looking at a business model that would be similar to governments like a major corporation, mm-hmm. So you have divisions, which are the ministries, and then you have the consulting group, if you would, that are affiliated with it, and I think that's where the private members
private members in. You have a flexibility of being a private member, so
yes.
So you can ask those tough questions to the executive council as well.
Well, in our forefathers, the Westminster model, they kind of nailed it in that regard. Whether you're on one side or two sides or different sides of whatever political stream, but as a private member, the impetus really is you have a political affiliation. Let's say in this case, and what your job is to do is to be your eyes and ears and the conscience, the moral conscience of well, I shouldn't say the moral conscience, but the conscience of the government, if you would. Mm-hmm. So again, we're part of the government caucus, we're part of that same team, but at the same time, it's almost like bouncing ideas off your best friend or your spouse, as that example. So you have that type of relationship, you keep each other that soundboard or that sounding check. And it's a very, very, very good system. The other thing that jumps out is, as frustrating as it is to us at times, is the bureaucracy, the way the bureaucracy of government is set up. It's the legacy. It outlives the elected officials, and the elected officials are kind of like the management, but you still need the business to run. Mm-hmm. So if you just flew up your business and came back every 4 years, well, then it would be pretty difficult. But you have the business running that model, and the outside influences, we check, and we do that salient check. And literally it's allowing, by electoral representation, it's allowing your constituents to have that voice at that table at that moment. It's pretty empowering. And the other thing that I didn't realize as a private member, you kind of nailed on it. You do have a lot of influence. You get enough voice in there, especially with our government. I'm not sure if all of them are the same, but they rely on us tons. We'll be picked up by ministers depending on your background, your education, what your aptitudes are in certain areas. We'll be tasked up with task forces. We'll be helping out the ministers do the heavy lifting and bounce around, and also the committee work. And right now, obviously, to your reason for having me down here, I think one of them is literally budget.
Yeah.
So we're at that budget time right now, and we get to be the eyes and ears and going through the budget details and asking all those questions of how they came up with it, why they made those decisions.
Excellent. Just to recap from
Yes.
what you were just saying, so it seems that your team there is very democratic.
Oh, absolutely.
That's very good to know.
Yeah, now here's, the Westminster model is neat. The Premier right at the start, and I didn't know Premier Kenny when I ran. I didn't run for Jason Kenney. I ran for the constituents in my area. I've always been a conservative, mindset. It was fantastic that they joined the parties, but I didn't run specifically for a person.
So you have been, you've seen from the both perspectives, you have been a professional who was a working professional as well as a small business owner, as a consultant.
Thanks.
So you have seen, things from both perspectives, both sides, yeah. So what is your, take on the opportunities for the small business right now?
Well, it's been challenging, like up until the point where we actually took a little bit of control. Obviously the small business owners, the job creators, and the good folks in Alberta, put us back in control. Because of that, there was tons of levers that were pulled. So whether it was the cost per hour for the minimum labor, whether it was labor standards, whether it was the work weeks, how overtime calculations were. The carbon tax was insidious. I mean, when you actually start looking at the numbers, arguably it was about 25 to 30% uptick.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have an opportunity for the small businessmen and women out there to raise their rates on anything, and you've got this exorbitant cost which is compounded on everything, and it was stealing our Alberta advantage.
Any tax is bad, whether it is carbon tax or increase in corporate taxes, which happened before. I'll come to it. But carbon tax has another side of the story too. There were lots of rebates, lots of energy efficient projects that were being done, and the government, the then government, NDP government, claimed it to be a neutral revenue kind of things. They were doing it to promote few of the great projects, LRT project, electricity buses project, and a middle income and lower income group. They actually got a lot of rebates through it. So what is your take on it?
That's a fallacy.
That's a fallacy.
Yeah, no, it is. So the best way to demonstrate this is if I took a bunch of grade 6 students, and I took, and this is literally what I did, because the kids are wonderful, because they're kind of the litmus test of what's happening in the person's home. So you can actually understand the conversations around the kitchen table by listening to a kid in grade 6 or earlier, grade 4 to grade 6 is kind of the sweet spot. And one little girl put it to me, well, you don't care about the planet. You don't care about the environment. I go, well, why is that? Well, because you guys don't like carbon tax. I go, okay. I said, you want to save, the carbon and all those things. You want to save the planet. I said, yeah, well, so do we. I said, but let's see how this works. So let's take Kennedy. Let's all pretend you give me $1 each. So now I have the $10. Okay, so I'm going to keep 6 of the dollars. I'm going to take the other 4 and I'm going to break it between 6 of you.
Yeah.
And I said, did we save the planet? And I mean, the kids get it right away. So when you artificially grab a bunch of cash, you take it across the line, you have this huge administrative cost that you're going to deal with, and then you decide who gets it back, which rebates or which middle class folks get those. I never met any. I met people that were so down on their luck, old seniors and everything else. We're trying to determine in my constituency back in February when we had a cold snap of how physically cold that they could take their house down to with wearing sweaters and otherwise that they wouldn't freeze up the house and still remain comfortable. They were trying to determine what the good food was that they could buy. These are people on fixed incomes. They were not getting a rebate. So if anybody deserved a rebate, you would think that would be it. Counterintuitively, no, they didn't qualify. So you've got a bunch of folks that don't qualify. You've got some of these winners and losers. We're paying companies from Ontario to run around in Calgary and change light bulbs because we're going to save the planet. So that is misguided. Some of the benefits they may have had in the First Nations otherwise, yeah, there may have been some upticks. But from what we've seen for the most part, it was discombobulated at best. It was just a bad tax. So once we took that off the table, the official opposition were so concerned that if we took out their tax, that the Trudeau tax would come in right away, which it didn't. They dragged their feet and stalled off until January.
It's too early to say it didn't. It may still, because there are 3. As you know, the court has given 3 different kind of verdicts. Similar verdict in Ontario and Saskatchewan, and opposite to that is in Alberta. So now probably Supreme Court will decide, and it is still 2:1. So it is more likely that probably Trudeau will have his way. And if that happens, then you will not have the power of controlling your own funds it will be then directed by the federal government.
Yeah, and I guess if I'm looking on the timeline, I was suggesting that when we took out that carbon tax, we didn't experience it until this year, so January 1st, 2020. So we did have that reprieve. Now, the concern that the opposition were saying was immediately, as soon as you do that, you lose control, etc. Now, worst case scenario, and just oversimplification, if you look at the federal carbon tax, they tax everybody equal. Everyone pays 100%. So you pay that 100% tax. They pull it across the table to their side. They keep 10% and then they redistribute through your income tax once you do your credits. And then it goes back to everybody, but you only get 90 cents on the dollar that you've paid for the tax in. And then the next year they would increase it, and the next year they would increase it. So when we did our carbon tax challenge, unlike the other provinces, what we looked at was constitutionally. So constitutionally, and that's why our Court of Appeals was, there's a 200 and some odd page document. I suggest everyone pick it up and read it, because it really starts to talk about our constitution and our country itself. The quote that really resonated and stuck off the page was, it was a Trojan horse. So essentially, you would take that horse, you would offer it as a gift. Once that individual took it in behind their wall, all these other things would spring out in the middle of the night. Now, that was literally their avenue to come along and ratchet up that tax. So all the numbers, all the methodology, everything else, it doesn't work. So our approach was that tiered program. So technology and innovation that we were going to look at. Now, the heavy polluters, the industry, I mean, let's face it, if I'm looking at the refining capacity out here, it far exceeds what I'm going to do riding my bicycle, obviously, but driving my car down the street, even if you took the cumulative effect. So the heavy polluters are our industry. Our industry agreed, yeah, tax us at the same rate, so we'll do that. And then we'll look at technology and innovation to come up with a solution. So again, when you look at it, you're using what we have, our capacity to learn, our capacity to innovate, our actual brain power that we have to come up with technological solutions. You know, you don't hear that we have the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, which is going to be the largest in the world, essentially 650 kilometers. It straps onto the Northwest Refinery in Agrium that uses all that carbon capture and then puts it downhole for enhanced oil recovery, so it rejuvenates the existing oil fields. You don't hear about that. You don't hear that since we changed the regulation rate in the energy market, there's been a 300% uptick on private investment for wind generation. These are all the things when you start putting the levers and you let industry know, when you start putting those guidelines in place. Good governance should be this, not the nanny state. And this is my opinion, others may vary, but not the nanny state. What you do is through prudence, through that electoral process and through the culture, you determine what the boundaries are. So if you're driving down the highway, you have guardrails. So those are kind of your guardrails. You got the lines on the road and then you have an objective to get to. As long as the individual and society and everybody can agree to the path you're going, don't bounce outside those edges. There's your safety measures. We can all get there. Industry is no different. If we give them goals, stretch targets even, give them reasonable and practical so they know where they're driving, they'll come up with the solutions. Us shutting down drastically, the former government, shutting down power generation in my constituency.
I see.
Yeah, lots of impacts. 1,000 jobs were lost because of that. And then we as taxpayers had to pay for the rapid acceleration of the shutdown phase out of our thermal generation. So we're paying for a pipeline to burn gas in something that we still should have been able to run for the next 20 years. And again, if you looked at the technology, the literally stuff coming out of the tailpipe, it was cleaner than most gas-fired units because we already did this work 25 years ago at the Devon Research Institute to come up with a new way of burning that product. Those are the type of things you never heard about. So the last group that went through, and I don't want to throw stones, but when you're fixated on ideology rather than looking at the practicality of it, that's where things happen. And we end up taking money, putting it in someone's pocket, thinking we're changing it outside, and in actuality we're not. So there's the difference. We're taking a mindset approach. Now here's one. You got me going on the carbon thing. But the biggest impact that we could do on the rest of the world is literally get clean burning natural products and our technology over to the heaviest polluters in the world. So arguably India and China. India wants our stuff. China wants our stuff. We can't get it to them because of Bill C-69. We're taking 10 years to get one little TMX project, 10 years to get one little pipeline project approved. I could count 4 projects on my hand that were yarded off the table that were already pre-approved. The whole item with tech pulling out. When a government can't reconcile, so let's say the federal government, let's put it in context, when they can't reconcile with what their environmental requirements are, with their actual ability to build projects, to actually enhance and rejuvenate their industries and to keep building that forward, That is the crux of it. No one knows what the heck the rules are because they keep changing the rules. So what we're doing is we're trying to stabilize it. If you look at our platform, everything we've done to this point, and inclusive of budget 2020 and 2019, was to literally put a plan in place that people can follow along at home. If you're curious to see what's happening next, just open up our platform commitments. We're 50% of the way through. Turn the page, that's what's happening next. We want to send that clear message. We believe in climate change. We believe that we can impact the differences. We believe that we can use our technology and innovation. We believe that not just taking money from Peter to pay Paul will actually do anything to the actual environment. We think approaching that problem, looking at it in a scientific and methodical manner, and applying the resources we have to tackle it. We also believe in growing the energy sector. It's an integrated sector. So again, my time at Enbridge, I worked on pipelines. We worked on power generating facilities. We were putting transshipment facilities, so oil by rail. We put in power generation, wind turbines, all these type of things. We weren't told to from a carbon tax. We were doing that anyway. So when we're talking energy, and that's a great thing for Enbridge's name, Energy Bridge, we're looking to bridge through industry to the next thing. We're going to wean off eventually on fossil fuels, but we're not there yet. When you can't oversee the event horizon stretching out past 2040 for the peak demand, why would we stop doing what we're doing, lose the potential resources, getting our good stuff to the markets where we can most affect it by getting our technology and clean fuels over to Asia? LNG, for example. If we could reduce, let's say arguably, if China was 25% of the output, let's say if we could make an impact of even 10%, that would far outstrip our own pollution, given by whoever's measurements. Let's say arguably like the highest side, 0.5 to 1%. So if we can offset 10% of the world's output versus our 0.5%, if we shut everything completely down, 0.5%, it's nothing. But if we can impact that and do what we do as Canadians and as Albertans, that's massive. And that's the impact we can
Well,
make.
what you're saying is really is very interesting. But perhaps your predecessors did not think exactly the way you are thinking, because the perception even today is that when you talk about conservative, whether it is federal or provincial, climate change is pretty much low down in the priority. Whether you agree or not, that is what the perception is. At this point.
Well, and that's the unfortunate thing that we always have. And it's nice to get an interview like this again, because I get to speak and I'm fairly confident what that I say won't be necessarily carved up and edited into 2-second sound bites. But the perception is that, you're conservative, so you only like money and you don't like the environment. Well, it's both.
Yeah.
There is no way that I would develop a project without the environment being first and foremost. So let's put it in context. Do you like the environment? Yeah, it's where I live. So being rural, we're more connected with what the true environment is than anything else. With me working on these pipeline projects right across the prairies, going into the United States and everything else, going through people's backyards, ripping it up and tearing it up, and then putting it all back so it's better than new. That's what we do as an industry. So there's a culture. It's not 1902 anymore, it's 2020. Things that at the heyday of when the first discoveries, you would never contemplate doing that. We get better and better and better all the time. Using tech as an example, they were half the output of what our current facilities are now. That's how much of the innovation is gone forward. So for future generations and everything else, we hold ourselves to a higher standard than somebody else would, just because we don't stand out there with picket signs.
So we are very hopeful that new leaders like you will make it so much more balanced, because it wasn't the case. Because look at the immediate past, or even go half a century down the line. You look at even Alberta's history, barring those 4 years, close to half a century it was conservative government, and not much of an initiative was taken for pipeline. You could have done it much earlier, probably, because you had the federal government, also at the provincial government, and now with those 4 years, it cannot be really put everything onto the NDP that they did not move forward, because you also did not move forward. But when I say you, your team, but when the new leaders we talk to, we see so much more change. So we are very hopeful that it will have a balancing act between the environment and, of course, the business. We need money to run the environment, and we need to live in that environment. So that is where you come into picture. You person like you would change the perception.
Well, and that's part of it too. And I would go back to 2007, 2009. So I can arguably say at that point in the history of my career, the environmental rigor that we had then is not so dissimilar to what we have now. So as industry, we don't self-promote very much. We're kind of like the quiet professionals. And as far as the governments, I couldn't comment too much on what the governments were. But I know that Stephen Harper had done something really good, which was identifying that we could do our crossings and our methodology, identifying major tributaries. so that you didn't have to treat every little project like a snowflake. They were even going in so far as to say that we would actually have an energy corridor. Sound familiar? So when you start talking about a de facto energy corridor, we were doing it anyway. If you look at the right-of-ways for TransCanada and Enbridge, or TC Energy now I should say, and Enbridge, they were essentially following the same path that took us from Fort McMurray down to Minot, North Dakota. Essentially we were crossing in the Manitoba area. So if you're looking at the TransCanada Highway or otherwise, and you look at all these tributaries you're crossing, we're talking about the major ones. Where we used to be really competitive, and you had the environmental idea of making sure industry was held to a high standard, and you make sure that industry does that. On the project teams, I have more environmentalists on my team than or the environmental group had on 4. So you're self-regulating to make sure that there's compliance, and there's a lot of social governance in that, because the biggest thing on a publicly traded company is the public's perception. If you go and change my share prices by $1, I'm losing massive amounts of money. So if the cost of my social governance and doing the right thing is way easier to affect and have that perception, do the right things, then why wouldn't you do that? Again, we've got the guardrails on the side of it, industry's moving down that way. Now what I've found is that politics isn't necessarily the best person for the job. It just happens to be the best person who's selling vacuum cleaners door to door that gets enough votes for them to go do a job. Now that's the beautiful thing about our system, the way it's set up, is every person or any person could be the representation for their fellow man and their constituents. However, when you put an individual like that in control of a portfolio where they have no experience or they don't have the acumen for that, to readily manage and ask the right questions of that organization, coming back to your comment of having the right people now at this time, our bench, all of us are not professional politicians with the exception of a few. We all left our industries. We all stepped forward. We all took, in all likelihood, some massive pay cuts to come do what we do, to make sure that we're there at this time right now to fix things, so we can go back and we can look our kids in the face and say we did everything we could for the environment, for the economy, for our province, for our country, so that we can sustain that. Folks travel from all across the world to come to this province. And it's an amazing thing when you look at it. Minister Madhu and going to an EBO event, it really resonated with me. There was a time when I was traveling and doing all those things, and my kids would ask me, well, where are you at? Well, I was in the States, or I was over in Europe, or I was somewhere else. And, well, was it nice? Yeah, it was great. I said, but you know what? You live in the best province, in the best country in the world. The last 4 to 5 years, I was struggling to be able to say that because I saw the country and the province that I love so much being turned into something else and not having that control. And I think that probably a large majority, considering the election that we had, and in my area it was nearly 70% of the vote, felt the same way. They wanted a change. They wanted us to put it back, the Alberta Advantage. They wanted the right people in place again. They wanted us to push back at those that were trying to turn our country and turn us against each other. And that's what I'm really working on, and our team is doing that, and we're going to fix this. We're rounding the corner and putting these things in place. They're starting to take hold. But as a constituent of mine, he had said, he says, I hear all this noise on the radio, and I hear all this noise on the television, and see some stuff in the newspapers, and he says, you know what that makes me say? And I'm kind of feeling bad about it, and I'm going, am I doing a good job or not? He goes, every time I hear them squeak and they squawk about something or other, I know you're doing the right thing, because now they're making noise, so you're affecting it. And again, we can see those impacts. The next thing I'm working on is a transportation utility corridor, so in a trade corridor. And I actually had my first motion. So as a private member, you get pulled. It's like having a lottery, and you can either have motions or you can have bills or both. And the fact that I managed to get my motion here this week as a private member, the very first one that was put into the House, which was to have our government, being the Alberta government, go out and chase after trade and transportation utility corridors. So the concept on that is I want road, I want rail, I want power lines, I want fiber optics, and I want the ability to move product through pipe. I want to make sure that we do full-on consultation and participation with our First Nation brothers and sisters. The fact that they would, through our Aboriginal or Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corp, have partnership along there. Now the pipeline companies have been doing this for a long time. You see a lot of things in the media, it gets a lot of people cross-threaded and everything else. And that's just a legacy from us not settling our land claims as a country for a number of years. And in some areas there are no treaties, which really makes it problematic, such as the coastal gas is experiencing. But for Alberta, for the most part, we have some really good people behind us. they want to be full participants. They want to be engaged in this. And you look at some of the most successful stories and the most affluent communities, they're the ones that participated in the programs. Because as one counselor put it to me once from the Paul Band, he says, our traditional thing is to be hunters. We used to go and we'd hunt after game. Well, now the game is the energy sector, it's the projects, it's the work. We have to understand that you have to leave home to go hunt the game. We're really good hunters and we like this. And the groups and the communities that take that into perspective, they know that if they have the work for that time period, they have joint ownership of it, they have literally an assessment. They have a revenue stream that helps bring them up. And us as Albertans, why wouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't you want those people to be working with you and everything else? And in our area, it's Treaty 6. Now, the symbolism on Treaty 6 literally is the old Union Jack. And it's the picture of a First Nations man and obviously a European settler or something along those lines, and they're shaking hands. To me, that resonates more than anything else. That speaks to what our agreement is as Albertans, what we are with our First Nations. We're shaking hands, we're making an agreement.
We're working
and that's
together.
the deal. So that whole concept falls right behind that trade corridor. And then we would take that on our side of the fence as government and go talk to the other provinces and territories. We would literally find a path where we could align, if you would, where we want to build our infrastructure out. Once we do that, we unlock everything. We don't have to be begging to try to go east, to move our product down east. We have the West Coast, and if we can't get to the West Coast through Kitimat because we keep squabbling and scrapping amongst ourselves and can't figure it out, well, let's go to Alaska. Let's bypass British Columbia. Let's go through the Northwest Territories. Let's slide our alignment over towards Carmacks and the Yukon so we can unlock all those resources they need. Let's tie it into Alaska, and then we have access to 3 deep sea ports. So whether we're moving product, and let's just say arguably that deep sea ports, not all tide is created equal, so maybe your viewers don't know that. Getting to Vancouver doesn't really give me much more of a competitive advantage because literally the size of the boat that I can put in the water in Vancouver's harbor is limiting me to about 80,000 barrels. The boats that I can do either in Kitimat that we were originally looking at with the Gateway Project, or if you move further north up to Anchorage or Valdez, then I can get in 2 million barrel tankers. 2 million barrel tankers now puts me over into Asia and India, which just by the Great Circle, the way the line is, and obviously our globe, it puts me 2 to 8 days depending on the shipping lanes. So let's say arguably 5 days, 4 days even, 4 days quicker than I can coming out of the Tsawwassen terminal. I can be moving an 80,000 barrel thing that takes me 4 days longer, or I can move a 2 million barrel unit that gets me there 4 days quicker. So the actual volume that we're moving. Now the backhaul is incredible. Now that same tanker, if you would put it in that context, we're going to be bringing products from Asia. Right now everything comes into Tsawwassen or Seattle. They're trying to penetrate our coast and then they get into the down east and the Midwest. With all that backlog of that current traffic and the size of the boats coming in those harbors, they're backed up. I'm now taking, again, big boats, big super sea can shippers out of those 3 ports because they move both products. I'm actually getting them to market about 8 to 10 days quicker just because of that backlog in the logistics. So why would we not start thinking about things like this, where we could utilize our free trade zone? We could put in an inland shipping terminal up in the northern part here in Sturgeon County. We could then have companies like Dow Petroleum or Dow Chemical producing all the plastics that they want because their customers are over in Asia. Now let's say the other thing we're always talking about a diverse economy. So a diverse economy is utilizing the pillars of economy you have now. So let's say forestry, agriculture, oil and gas, etc., along those commodity-based ones. And then let's see what we can do in that value-added chain, because we're really great at producing lots of bulk stuff and other people do the finishing, but let's look at those value chains. So if I took agriculture as an example, I don't have enough mouths to feed in Canada. We're a massive exporter, number is too. Asia wants our product. So if I'm looking at Asia or China or India as an example, I'll use China. They want Canadian products. They know our products are fantastic and raw. When you take these products over and you let their manufacturers do it, they don't have the same quality control standards. So you might have something else that gets cut in that, or they diminish the actual quality. What they're looking at doing is manufacturing joint venture partnerships, 49, 51% ownership. They would like to have within 140, 150 kilometer radius of their manufacturing facilities, bring it right from the farm gate to the manufacturing facility. Within 14 days, have that product that we produce that they want to have their native tongue language on it, and they want to see that maple leaf in the corner. And we put a little Alberta flag there too. You put that in the corner of it, get that onto a CCAN, get that out to market, and get it to our plates within 14 days. We currently can't decouple the system. So until we figure out the logistics issue, until we can actually start working together, and regardless of political stripes, this is a nation builder. This literally is the founding fathers, when they put the first CP rail and they drove it across our country. It wasn't to drive a railroad, it was to literally bind us together as a nation.
Wow.
That's what we're talking about. This is a nation building thing, and if we as the Alberta government take the lead on it, we have that right now with Premier Kenny, who's that statesman that's able to have that and make sure the provinces are working together. We get ourselves at alignment. We could literally, within 2 years, if we did the heavy lifting, take away all the risk, do all the negotiations, make sure that our regulators approve projects, and then industry will know exactly what the rules are, pass it across the table. There's literally trillions of dollars of capital that we could uncouple that would come into this.
Excellent. So welcome back.
Oh, thank you.
It was fantastic talking to you. We'll carry on our last round. But I must say to the listeners over here that Mr. Getson was talking about the paradigm shift.
Yes.
And from the perspective of an engineer and a business owner, more so wearing the caps of a business owner, consultant and engineer rather than a politician. I hope it will all gel together and you will be able to spearhead the team to show some new visions. I was spellbound by a few of your thoughts. So let's carry on with it.
Well, thank you. And and part of that, coming back to the input, is that our team really respects each other's strengths and our weaknesses. And not that there's a ton of weakness, but being new to politics, it's a perceived weakness because you don't understand how that process works.
What about the weakness? I will ask a few questions. The way the budget was calculated.
Yes.
One perceived weakness is that the barrel of oil was estimated to be $58, but now it is about $11 shy of $58. So probably with coronavirus and so other so many external environments, things which are happening is beyond your control. So do you think it was exaggerated a bit or inflated a bit in terms of the revenue aspirations you had?
Not at all. I can explain that in simple manner. So when you run a project, and let's go outside of the budget for example, because major projects, we always have big budgets too. So when you have a budget, you come up with your best guess, you come up with the parameters, you're basing it on an actual accrued, incurred, and a forecast value. So at that time, you're taking the best information that you have, and you're also putting it against a schedule. So now let's just look at this in reality. Typically in a project, if I'm doing a pipeline project, I'm reporting on a weekly basis. If I'm doing a major facility project, I'm reporting on a 2-week basis. When I do my report, and let's say you're my boss, I have information from a certain data point. I take all my dollars and cents, I take my progress and my activities, and I then lock in that information, that period. And then any of my other analysis goes out from that point. So from that point, I'm projecting either based on a curve or a trend, or if I know there's a certain milestone or something else that may cause an effect in the end. And then I'll forecast that. So you're taking a WAG, a wild something guess. So you would be guessing at that point and you're making a forecast, a projection. That's what happens. So I'm basing my information on a data point. It takes me several days to compile that information. And meanwhile, reality marches on. So there's things that are in your control, not your control, and it's a best guess. Like honestly, it's a forecast. So you're
so this is, you think the estimates were okay?
Absolutely.
It's not overestimated.
Because again, when you look at the estimate and the period they took it, it was based on 2 or 3 weeks ago. So you're releasing a budget on Thursday and it's 2 Thursdays ago where they had to lock in their data. So when you have a swing in a commodity price, you have the coronavirus that is going rampant, that's hitting Asia's markets and now affecting us, there is no way that they could have contemplated that. But they did have a conservative forecast, unlike the other group that was
conservative. It's the other way around. It's very optimistic forecast.
Well, it's only optimistic if something came out of the parameters you couldn't account for. But and that's where it was conservative by nature, in so much as we weren't expecting $70 or $80 oil. And if you looked at the prior group, everything that we inherited for a budget,
let's forget about the prior group. What I'm saying is that $58 a barrel probably will not reach even in a year or so. Well, but that's the average taken for the entire term.
Yeah, and that's the average for the term. And again, the biggest thing that we have isn't the price of oil; it's the differential between West Texas Intermediate and our oil. And the reason why we can't get full value and full choke for our price is because I can't get it to market. I'm only limited to one customer and of our commodity types. So as soon as we decouple that, back to my first statement, now I'm competing at West Texas prices because I have more than one customer to sell to.
Yeah, one very good thing from all the residents of Alberta or even Canadians, that whether it is NDP in the province or UCP your team or the federal team, Trudeau's team, all are looking or working together for the pipeline. That is one very good thing to happen. Hopefully it stays that way, because if we, I mean, that is a fact, and it is best interest of everyone to work together.
Yeah, and absolutely. So what we have to do is convert that political capital where people say what they do, and then we can combine it with actions.
Yeah.
So there's my project side of it. What I'm and what I can say is, and honestly, so it depends whom those individuals are speaking to in their base. If they're actually genuine for that, or unfortunately some, and I can say this now being behind that wire, some are looking for the next election. I think if you actually look at the national interest, you start getting it back to where our founding fathers had those principles. You do those things. Now, you don't need one view. You need several views and vantage points to be able to give you the ultimate solution and to come up with that, to make sure that everyone's working in the same way, in the same manner. Unfortunately, right now, I don't think we've ever had such a crux in our history, in our time, because we've got all this technology for us to communicate, but we don't talk to each other anymore.
That's exactly.
And what happens is folks end up speaking to that camera. They don't talk to each other as much. We don't have the debates that we should. We don't have that, and that's where we got to fix that.
Yeah.
And if anything that I can do is an impact, if there's anything that I can give, it's literally to be proud to be an Albertan and proud to be a Canadian. We're strong and free for a reason, and let's have a unified cause. And I've said this several times and in the House recently. I don't care if you're black, blue, green, purple, pink. I don't care if your favorite color is orange or blue. You better figure out we're in the boat together, and we better start rowing in the same direction. That's the only way we turn this around. It's the only way we get out of this one alive.
I've got one last question. After that, I'll give you the opportunity to recap. The last question is balanced budget at what cost? Because we are seeing so many cuts. Even healthcare or education, because I'm putting into one question and there are different pieces to it, you can answer me all together. So we are seeing those cuts, or even if there is no cut, say for example health and education, which you maintained that there has been no cuts, but considering there will be population growth, considering there will be inflation, I mean in real terms there are cuts. So, and there are so many job losses. On one hand, the finance minister of the province says it's a job creation budget. At the same time, you're shedding so many public sector jobs. And even Professor I do not like to name him, Professor McEwen, who actually ran for a nomination from Conservative, he was with me. And when he listened to that 2.5% cut, he said, thank God, I'm relieved, because I thought it could be probably more than that. So the sentiment or the morale is a little bit weak at this point. So how would you like to recap? How would you like to summarize it, please? And after that, you can completely recap our conversation and your message to the constituents.
So I think, I'm not sure if it was Einstein or not, said doing the same thing the same way and expecting different results is the definition of insanity, something along those lines.
Yeah.
So when I campaigned and when we campaigned, it was never on getting reelected. It was campaigning on doing the right things to fix it while we were here. So arguably the 2.8% cut, the reduction in spending, we have to. So if you don't turn that downward trend, if you don't change cultures and influences, we'll keep spending to the rate of inflation. And when you don't have the revenue stream to support it, the whole house of cards falls. So when we're talking maintaining spending, so we haven't cut education, but we haven't necessarily allowed for some of the inflations, or we haven't done the same for the medical, or part of these things are not growing at the rate of inflation. They're exceeding and outstripping the rate of inflation by a large margin. And quite honestly, it's because of inefficiencies, and it's an inefficiency culture. So when it's the first time in 25 years that a government, the newly elected officials, actually go into a department and say, do you need more money this year? Oh, and by the way, what are you spending it on? Show me what you're doing. First time in 25 years. So,
but why first time in 25 years? I mean, 4 years ago also.
Hey, money was good. Everything's flat.
So at that point,
spend, and that's the problem. That's the culture.
True.
So it's we squandered the Alberta Advantage. The Alberta Advantage was that they carved it back. There was a time period where they pulled back the numbers and they made all the sacrifices, and then we grew. The red tape is insurmountable. We're looking for a 1/3 reduction. So literally it's 3 million different processes. We're looking to eliminate 1 million, to put it in context. There's been so many things that have clogged up the system, and we need to make it efficient. My prior life, that's what I would do as a consultant, drop into an organization, determine what the processes were, debottleneck it, streamline it. And when you did that, productivities went up, more people went, and your throughput went through. So again, it's a paradigm shift. Looking at the governments and the departments of making it run efficient we'll actually make it better. We'll actually get more throughput for it. We'll get more bang for the dollar and in a sense, grow the services that we can provide. So that's where we're at now. We have to hold the line. So back in the day, Ralph Klein, no one would lend them money. They had to do a 20% cut literally across the board because no one would lend them money. And if you're going to keep this thing rolling, you need to have the capital, you need to have the funds coming in. And it's not the taxpayer that pays for the party. It's the business that pays for the party. You know, if we had a group of 100 people here, do you think we could build a major project like tech if we took all of our money and threw it on the table? It isn't. It's all those shareholders out there. And it's those big equity firms, and that's what we need, and that's the big business that we need. So everything we're putting in place is to set that ground. And I'll give you an example when you're saying it didn't turn around with the jobs. So really simple, because I'm a farm guy. Let's say that I've got 100 head of cattle, I've got one watering well, and I pour in a bunch of cyanide. So the solution to pollution is dilution. So I pour in an amount of cyanide. What happens is I kill off a bunch of them, and then I kill off some of them, and then the rest are just sick and weakened. How often do you think they'll come back to that well? How often do you think they'll have their outputs and their size that they used to before? That's our economy. Those are the folks, unfortunately, right now that we have. And that's what's happened. You can't turn this around. We're healing that well. We're trying to bring people to the well. And every time that these politicians, I'm going to say these, start talking to that camera rather than to each other, you send out messaging that's making that herd, those people, scared to come back to the well. So we've got to put that in message. We've got to park our baggage, make sure we're talking about the best interest of the province, the best best reference for the country and the people, and it'll flourish again. That's what we need to do.
Excellent. So your final message to the Albertans and your constituents, and any message of hope?
Oh, absolutely, message of hope. So, message to my constituents and the Albertans. I ran on a campaign of giving me a job interview. You hired me, and you hired me based on what we were talking about at the time. So, taking control of the budget, changing our habits for the spending, making sure we're doing the right things, not trying to centralize everything, trying to make sure that there's efficiencies bred back into that, looking at a transportation utility corridor to give us that market access. Making sure it's stable, make sure people know that we're back open for business again. Make it that there's incentives for people to have small businesses. If people can have risks, then they deserve the rewards. And let's start working together. And that's the biggest thing that I can offer. Here's the hope. Start working together, we got hope. If you don't start working together, we're fighting ourselves. So the enemy has been identified, and it's us. If we don't fix the problem, then we are the problem. So let's fix it together. Let's get going the right way. Let's get the Alberta advantage going, and that's all of us. Alberta's strong and free, and let's be proud of the best province and the best country of the world again.
Thank you. That was Shane Getson. He is a politician, but he sounded so much like a visionary today. It was a paradigm shift, all what you were talking about, and hope you can, rejuvenate the team, and you put in some fresh blood, some fresh thinking. Let's all work together and make Alberta and our country strong again. Any questions you may have, please let us know. We will direct it back to your office and get you the answer. Thank you very much once again. Indranil Chaudhury signing you off from Star Canada TV.